I still remember the way my sister smirked at me across the table that night. She leaned back in her chair, her designer dress catching the dim light of the restaurant chandelier, and said loud enough for the whole table to hear, "If you're lucky, maybe they'll let you wash dishes here." Her words hit me like a slap, but I didn't flinch. She always knew how to poke at me, especially when the family was around. Everyone chuckled politely, though some of them looked uncomfortable. My sister had a way of making herself feel bigger by making others feel smaller. I took a sip of water, forcing a calm smile. "Funny," I said. "We'll see." Inside, I was boiling. I had worked hard for everything in my life. Nothing had ever been handed to me. Meanwhile, she had always been the golden child. Private schools, expensive gifts, family support, all showered on her while I was told to figure it out. Dinner went on with her mocking me at every turn. When the waiter brought the wine list, she smirked again. "Don't worry, sis. I'll cover your glass. No need for you to check your bank account tonight." Everyone laughed louder this time. Even my parents tried to hide their smiles. I bit my tongue. But then, something unexpected happened. About 10 minutes later, as she excused herself to take a phone call outside, the restaurant owner himself came to our table. "Excuse me?" he said, his eyes meeting mine. "Could I have a word with you?" Confused, I stood up and followed him. He led me through the polished hallways of the restaurant into his office. Once the door shut, he smiled warmly. He said, "I wasn't sure if it was really you. But it is, isn't it? You're Emily Carter, the consultant who helped redesign the menu at the Silver Oak in Manhattan, right?" I blinked. "Yes, that's me." His face lit up. "I owe you more than you know. That project saved my business. Tonight, your meal is on me." My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't expected to be recognized. Not here, not tonight, not in front of them. 10 minutes later, I stepped back out, but this time I wasn't just me. I was wearing the restaurant owner's coat, draped elegantly across my shoulders, the bill already taken care of, and the manager walking me back like I was someone of honor. The look on their faces? Priceless. My sister's smirk vanished, replaced by a stunned silence. The same people who had just laughed at me now stared as if they had never known me at all. And for once, I didn't need to say a single word. The restaurant was quiet now, almost too quiet. As I walked back to the table, the air felt thick with tension. My sister's eyes followed me, her mouth half open in disbelief. Everyone was staring, but no one knew what to say. I sat back down, my coat still draped over my shoulders like a shield, the weight of the evening finally sinking in. My sister, who had spent the entire meal poking fun at me, was now suddenly self-conscious. The smirk was gone, replaced by a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice a little too sweet. "Everything's fine," I replied, keeping my tone calm, almost indifferent. I could feel the uncomfortable silence around the table. The waiter came over to check if we needed anything else, and I ordered a second round of drinks for the table. No one said anything. The clinking of glasses was the only sound that broke the stillness. It wasn't until dessert arrived that my sister tried to speak again, but this time her words were different. She cleared her throat. I didn't mean anything by what I said earlier," she murmured, her eyes flicking nervously between me and our parents. "It was just... I was joking." I nodded slowly, studying her face. The familiar arrogance was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite read. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was just the realization that in that moment, she had underestimated me in the worst way possible. "Joking, huh?" I said softly, taking a bite of my dessert. "You should be careful with your jokes. Some of them hit harder than you expect." For the first time, she seemed at a loss for words. She glanced down at her plate, avoiding my gaze, and I could feel the shift in the room. The energy was different now. She had lost her upper hand, and I had gained something far more important: respect. We finished the meal in silence, and as we stood to leave, the manager came over again. He extended his hand to me, a wide grin on his face. "It was an honor having you here tonight. Please let us know if you're ever in town again. The Silver Oak is always at your service." I smiled back, nodding graciously. "Thank you. I will." Walking out of the restaurant, I felt a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in a long time. My sister's car was parked in front, but as we stood in the parking lot, she didn't make any move to get in. "You know," I said, breaking the silence, "I might have to stop by more often. Seems like I'm good for business here." She looked at me, her face unreadable. I didn't know you were that connected." I raised an eyebrow. "Maybe you should pay more attention to who's in your circle." With that, I turned on my heel and walked toward my car, not even waiting to see if she followed. As I drove away, I couldn't help but smile. I had just learned the greatest lesson of all. Sometimes the best revenge isn't in words or actions. It's in letting people see exactly what you're capable of and then leaving them to wonder how they missed it. The next few days were strange. My sister kept texting me, apologizing profusely, but I wasn't ready to accept her apologies yet. Not until I saw a change in her actions. Words were easy. It was the change in behavior that would speak louder. I decided to take a step back and give her some space. I had nothing to prove anymore. The events of that night were enough. But, of course, she wasn't going to let it slide so easily. It was a Sunday afternoon when she showed up at my apartment, unannounced. I had just finished reading through some work emails when I heard a knock at the door. Opening it, I found her standing there, holding a coffee cup in one hand, an air of uncertainty about her. She looked almost vulnerable. "Hi," she said, voice small. "I brought you coffee." I stepped aside to let her in, not sure what to expect. As she sat down, she placed the cup on the table and took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about that night," she began, her voice steady but with a hint of regret. "And I wanted to say, I didn't really get you. I didn't understand how much you've had to fight for what you have. I always assumed you'd be fine because, well, you always made things work. But I realize now that I was wrong." I studied her for a moment. This was different. Her words weren't filled with sarcasm or superiority. There was sincerity in her tone, something I hadn't heard from her in a long time. "I'm sorry," she added, a little quieter now. "I was never really there for you, was I?" I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before I responded. "It's not just about being there. It's about understanding. I don't expect people to hand me anything, but respect, that's something everyone deserves." She nodded slowly, her eyes flicking to the floor. "I think I finally get that." For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to argue. I didn't need to make her feel guilty or force her to apologize in a grand gesture. I just needed her to see the truth. And it looked like she did. "I've always had to stand on my own," I said softly. "And that's okay. I'm used to it. But it's a lot easier when the people around you don't look down on you for it." She met my eyes finally. "I don't look down on you. I never did. I just didn't understand." I could feel the weight of the years between us starting to lift. There was no immediate magic moment, no perfect reconciliation. But this was progress. Real, meaningful progress. "I know," I said, my voice gentle now, "and I'm not asking you to. I just need you to see me for who I am. And I think you do now." She smiled faintly, a small but genuine smile. "I do. I really do." As she left that day, I felt lighter than I had in years. It wasn't about getting back at her or proving anything anymore. It was about finally being seen, respected, and understood without needing to explain myself further. Weeks went by, and our relationship slowly began to change. We had dinner together again, but this time it was different. There were no barbs, no passive-aggressive comments, just two sisters, finally starting to build a real connection. And as for the family, they all noticed the shift too. My parents began treating me differently, with a newfound respect they hadn't shown before. The way they looked at me wasn't the same as it had been, and I knew this time it wasn't just about what I'd done in my career. It was about how I'd carried myself, how I'd handled the hard moments. That night, I didn't just walk away from the restaurant with the bill in my hand. I walked away with something far more valuable: my dignity, my worth, and the knowledge that respect doesn't come from titles or positions. It comes from the strength to stand tall no matter who's watching. As the weeks turned into months, things began to feel normal again, but in a way that was better than before. My sister and I, though we still had our moments of awkwardness, began to rebuild our bond, slowly but surely. The little sarcastic comments stopped, replaced by genuine conversations. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One evening, we decided to have dinner together at my apartment. Just the two of us. I'd invited her over, something I hadn't done in years. The table was set, a simple dinner of pasta and wine, and as she sat down, there was a calmness between us, a quiet understanding. "You know," she said, after a few minutes, taking a sip of her wine, "I don't think I ever truly understood how much it meant for you to succeed on your own." She hesitated for a moment. "I guess I thought maybe you didn't need anyone. But it was more than that, wasn't it? You've been fighting to prove yourself, not just to everyone else, but to yourself." I nodded. Exactly. It's not about needing anyone. It's about knowing that I can do it, even when the odds are against me. She looked at me, eyes softening. "I see that now. And I think that's why I've been so hard on you all these years. Because I didn't get it. I didn't get that you didn't need me to rescue you. You just needed me to respect you." I smiled, the tension easing from my shoulders. "It's okay. You're here now, and that's all that matters." After a pause, she reached over and gently touched my hand. "I'm proud of you, you know? I really am." The sincerity in her words made my chest tighten, but in a good way. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a sister who truly understood me, someone who could see beyond the surface and appreciate the journey I'd been on. As our relationship continued to grow, it wasn't just the two of us who noticed the changes. Our parents, too, began to see the differences in the way we interacted. They could tell that we were no longer just the two sisters who couldn't get along. They saw two women who had come to understand each other, who had fought their own battles, but were finally ready to stand side by side. One weekend, we all gathered for a family dinner at my parents' house. It was strange at first to see everyone together in the same space again, without the tension that used to hang in the air. But as the evening progressed, I saw something that made my heart swell. My parents, for the first time in my life, treated me like an equal. When my dad asked me for advice on a business decision, I saw my sister watch in silence, a hint of pride in her eyes. And when my mom passed me the salad bowl with a smile, I could feel that the dynamic had shifted. They weren't looking at me like the wild card or the second choice. They were looking at me as someone who had earned her place. After dinner, as we were all lounging in the living room, my mom leaned over to me. "You've come a long way, honey. We're proud of you." My sister nodded in agreement. "I think we all have." It wasn't a grand revelation, but it was a moment of quiet validation that meant the world to me. Finally, the respect I had always wanted, whether from my sister, my parents, or even from myself, was there. A few weeks later, I ran into the owner of the restaurant again. It was by chance, a brief encounter in the city when I was out shopping. He smiled when he saw me, as though he remembered the night I had walked out with his coat. "I see you've been doing well," he said, his eyes sparkling with recognition. "I was hoping you'd come back one day." "I'll be back," I said, returning his smile. "But next time, I'll pay my own bill." His laugh echoed in the street as he waved goodbye. But as I walked away, I realized something important. My life wasn't about proving anything to anyone anymore. It was about living on my own terms, about doing things because I wanted to, not because someone expected me to. The power wasn't in revenge or in having the last word. It was in finding peace within myself, knowing that I had finally gained the respect I deserved, not through force, but through strength, understanding, and the courage to stand tall. And that, in the end, was the most satisfying victory of all.
As the months passed, life continued to move forward, but things were never quite the same. I had begun to realize that success wasn't just about the accolades or the career milestones. It was about the relationships that had shifted, the understanding that had finally blossomed. My sister and I, now closer than we had ever been, started working on projects together. She came to me for advice on business decisions, and I found myself actually enjoying helping her. I could see the genuine change in her. The bitterness had melted away, replaced by a sense of mutual respect. One afternoon, we decided to start a side project together. It was something small at first, helping local businesses redesign their marketing strategies. It was her idea, and at first I was hesitant, but as soon as I saw the passion in her eyes, I couldn't help but say yes. It felt good, not just because it was a business opportunity, but because it was something we were doing together, as equals. It was around this time that I also started noticing subtle changes in my family. My dad, who had always kept his distance, began to call me more often. Sometimes it was just to check in on how I was doing. Other times it was to ask for advice about things at work. It was small, but it meant a lot. He had always viewed my achievements with a certain detachment, as though I had to prove them to him in order to earn his recognition. But now it felt like he was finally beginning to acknowledge my value, not just as his daughter, but as a professional. My mom, too, was different. She had always been supportive, but it was more in a quiet, unspoken way. Now she took an active interest in my work, asking questions about my clients and my projects. She was genuinely curious about the details of my career. It was clear that she was proud, and though she never said it outright, I could see it in her eyes. The real shift, however, came during a family reunion. It had been a few years since we had all gathered under one roof, but this time there was no tension. No whispers, no side glances, just family, together, as it should have always been. I watched my sister and my parents laughing at the dinner table, sharing stories, teasing each other. It was the first time in a long time that I felt like I was truly part of the fabric of the family. I wasn't just the outsider anymore. I was home. After the meal, my dad surprised me. He pulled me aside, his face serious. "I know I've never been the best at showing it," he began, looking at me with a sincerity that was rare for him. "But I'm proud of what you've done. You've built something real, and I respect that." I felt my throat tighten. It wasn't much, but it was everything. He didn't need to give me a grand speech or a formal acknowledgement. This simple sentence was all I had ever wanted. The respect, the recognition, not just for what I had done, but for who I had become. And then, to my surprise, my sister stood up. "Dad's right," she said, her voice clear. "You've worked so hard. I may have been blind to it before, but I see you now. I really do." For the first time, I saw her vulnerability. It wasn't just an apology, it was an admission that she had been wrong. And it felt good to finally hear those words from her. The sister who had once belittled me now offering her genuine respect. But the changes weren't just internal.
I had started seeing the results of my hard work in other ways. My business was growing, and not just in terms of clients, but in terms of influence. People were starting to notice me. I had been invited to speak at local seminars and conferences, something I had never imagined a few years ago. It was strange at first, standing in front of a crowd, sharing my journey, but the more I did it, the more it felt like I was finally living the life I had always dreamed of. One night, after speaking at a local event, I returned home to find a package waiting for me on the doorstep. It was from the restaurant owner I had met months ago. Inside the package was a handwritten note, along with a vintage bottle of wine. "Thank you for reminding me what's truly important in life: authenticity. Your presence in this world, the way you stand tall despite the odds, is something rare. I hope this bottle reminds you of your journey and the greatness ahead." I held the note in my hand, touched by the kindness and thoughtfulness. It was funny how such a small gesture, from someone who had been a stranger to me just a few months ago, could feel so meaningful. It was a reminder that the world had a way of surprising you, rewarding you for the things you least expected. A few days later, I received a call from an old friend. He had been following my career for a while and wanted to collaborate on a new venture. He had the connections, and I had the vision. We spent hours on the phone, brainstorming ideas, and by the end of the call, I could feel the excitement bubbling inside me. This was the next step, the one I had been waiting for. A new opportunity, one that could elevate everything I had worked for. It wasn't just about the success anymore. It was about the doors opening, one by one, leading me to places I had never even dreamed of. This was the culmination of everything: the hard work, the struggles, the family, the respect. The next morning, as I looked out the window of my apartment, watching the sun rise over the city, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. There were still battles to fight, challenges to face, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready. And as I stood there, knowing that the world was now my oyster, I couldn't help but smile. Everything had come full circle. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. The next few months passed in a blur of exciting new ventures. The project with my old friend started to take shape. Together, we launched a new consulting agency, focusing on helping businesses reinvent their marketing strategies in a way that felt authentic and true to their identity. It was a risk, but it felt like the perfect fit for me, melding my expertise with my desire to help others succeed on their own terms. At first, things were slow. We had a handful of clients, but we weren't making the big waves we'd hoped for. But the more I worked, the more I realized something important. Success wasn't going to come overnight. It never had. It was going to take time, patience, and above all, consistency. And that's exactly what I gave it. As we gained more clients, I found myself traveling more for work. There were meetings in Chicago, networking events in Los Angeles, and business dinners in New York. The hustle was real, but it didn't feel like a grind anymore. It felt like progress. One evening while in New York for a conference, I got a call from my sister. She was excited, almost breathless. "You won't believe it," she said. "I've been nominated for an award at work. The CEO just told me." I was thrilled for her. It wasn't the first time she'd received recognition, but this one felt different. It felt like her hard work was finally being acknowledged in the way it deserved. I congratulated her, genuinely happy for her success. "You know, I never would have imagined this a few years ago," she said, laughing nervously. "But you were right. Hard work pays off in ways I never thought possible, and now I see it." I smiled. It wasn't just the award I was proud of, it was the shift in her mindset. The sister I had once looked at with envy and frustration was now someone I could truly relate to. We had both come a long way in our own separate ways. It wasn't just my professional life that was thriving. My personal life had seen some improvements as well. I had started dating again, not with the urgency of needing to find the one, but with the understanding that it was okay to take my time. There was no pressure, no need to impress anyone. I was learning to enjoy the process, to get to know people without rushing into commitments. And for once, it felt liberating. One evening, I was on a date with someone I'd met at a business event. We were sitting at a quiet cafe, talking about everything and nothing at all. I realized that for the first time, I wasn't trying to be someone I wasn't. I wasn't putting up walls or pretending to be perfect. I was just me. Halfway through the conversation, I looked up and caught his eye. There was a calmness in his gaze, a kind of warmth that made me feel like I could finally breathe. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I think you're amazing. I've never met anyone like you before. You're not just successful, you're real, and that's rare." I smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over me. "Thank you. That means a lot to me." In that moment, I realized something important. My success, my journey, it wasn't just about proving myself to others. It was about embracing who I was, flaws and all, and letting people see me for who I truly was, not who I thought I needed to be. And the right people, whether in relationships or business, would appreciate that authenticity. As the months rolled on, things kept getting better. The consulting agency grew rapidly, and I found myself speaking at bigger conferences, meeting influential people, and working with some of the brightest minds in the industry. The recognition I had always sought was now pouring in, but it didn't feel as sweet as I had imagined. It felt natural, it felt earned, and more than that, it felt deserved. I also began to give back more. I started mentoring young entrepreneurs, teaching them the lessons I had learned the hard way. I spoke at local schools about entrepreneurship, about the importance of resilience and staying true to oneself. I shared my story with others, hoping they would learn from my mistakes, my successes, and my journey. It was during one of these speaking engagements that I realized just how far I had come. I was standing in front of a room full of students, talking about how I had built my business from the ground up. And as I looked out at their eager faces, I knew that this was the true meaning of success. It wasn't the awards or the recognition, it was in giving back, in helping others rise alongside me. After the talk, a young woman came up to me. "She just wanted to say thank you," she said, her eyes shining with admiration. "Your story really inspired me. I've been thinking about starting my own business, but I've been so afraid to take the leap. But hearing you talk about your journey, it's made me believe I can do it." In that moment, I realized that I had finally found my purpose, not just to succeed, but to lift others up along the way. And that was the kind of success that mattered most. One evening, as I was sitting at my desk reviewing the year's progress, I felt a sense of contentment that I hadn't felt in years. The challenges, the growth, the victories, they had all led to this moment. I had built something meaningful, not just for myself, but for others as well. And as I looked out at the city skyline, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. But even then, I knew this was just the beginning. There was still so much to do, so many people to help, and so many doors to open. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. As the new year rolled in, I found myself reflecting on everything that had brought me to this point. It had been a long, sometimes painful journey, but I had learned so much along the way. I had grown not just in terms of my career, but in my understanding of life itself. I now knew that success wasn't a destination. It was a journey, a series of steps, setbacks, triumphs, and lessons. The consulting business was thriving. We had expanded into new markets, and I was overseeing a team of dedicated professionals who shared my passion for authenticity and transformation. Every day felt like a new opportunity to create something meaningful. And yet, there was a part of me that knew I was ready for something more. I had achieved so much, but I wanted to do more. I wanted to make an even bigger impact, to take everything I had learned and help create change on a larger scale. I wanted to inspire people not just in business, but in life, to help them see that they too could overcome their obstacles and create their own success stories. That's when I decided to take the next step by writing a book. The idea had been floating around in my mind for a while. I had always loved storytelling, and my journey had been full of stories. Stories of struggle, perseverance, growth, and success. I wanted to share those stories with others, not just in speeches or workshops, but in a form they could hold in their hands, turn the pages, and read at their own pace. I reached out to a few literary agents, and soon I found one who believed in my vision. Writing a book was no small feat, but I was determined. I set aside time each day to write, pouring my heart and soul into the pages. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like giving up, when the words wouldn't come, or when doubt crept in. But I kept going. I knew this was something I had to do. The book was a blend of my personal journey, the lessons I had learned along the way, and practical advice for anyone who wanted to take control of their life and create something meaningful. It was a guide for overcoming adversity, a call to action for those who had been told they couldn't, a reminder that success wasn't reserved for a select few. It was for anyone willing to put in the work. Months passed, and finally the day came when I received the first copy of the book. Holding it in my hands, I felt a rush of emotions: pride, accomplishment, and gratitude. This book wasn't just mine. It was the culmination of all the people who had supported me, the lessons I had learned, and the dreams I had chased. I launched the book with a small event, inviting friends, family, and colleagues who had been part of my journey. The evening was filled with laughter, stories, and a sense of shared accomplishment. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us, the people who had walked alongside me, supported me, and believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. But the real breakthrough came when the book began to get noticed. It wasn't a bestseller overnight, but it resonated with people. The messages started pouring in, people from all over the world telling me how the book had changed their perspective, how it had inspired them to take action in their own lives. It was overwhelming in the best way possible. One message in particular stood out to me. A woman from a small town had reached out to tell me how my book had helped her start her own business. She had been stuck in a job she hated, but after reading my story, she had decided to take the leap and open her own boutique. Her words filled me with such pride. It was proof that my story was doing what I had hoped it would, empowering others to take control of their own destinies. As I continued to promote the book, I started to receive invitations to speak at larger events, conferences, panels, and even universities. I had come a long way from that first night at the restaurant when I had been mocked and underestimated. Now I was standing in front of thousands, sharing my story and my message of resilience and empowerment. But even with all the recognition and success, I never lost sight of what mattered most: the relationships I had built along the way. My sister, now a successful businesswoman in her own right, had become not just my family, but my closest confidant. We often collaborated on projects, and I loved how we now complemented each other in ways we never had before. And my parents, they were proud. I could see it in the way they spoke about me to others, in the way they treated me like a true partner in their lives. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about us, as a family, rising together. One evening, as I sat in my office, reflecting on everything that had happened, I received a call from the same literary agent who had helped me publish my book. She had some exciting news. "Your book's been nominated for an award," she said, her voice full of excitement. "It's up for Best Self-Help Book of the Year." I sat back in my chair, stunned. I had never expected this. Yes, I had hoped my book would make a difference, but to be nominated for an award was something I hadn't dared to dream. As I processed the news, I couldn't help but think about everything that had led me to this point. From the moment I had walked into that restaurant, humiliated and underestimated, to the woman I had become, a confident, successful businesswoman with a story to tell. I had come a long way, but I knew this was just the beginning. The night of the awards ceremony arrived, and I found myself standing in front of a crowd of industry professionals and fellow authors. My heart raced as the nominees for the category were announced. When they called my name, I couldn't believe it. My hands shook as I walked up to accept the award, and when I stood at the podium, all I could think about was how far I had come and how much further I still had to go. I looked out at the audience and realized something important. This wasn't just my victory. It was the victory of everyone who had supported me, who had believed in me, and who had helped me along the way. I took a deep breath and smiled. This award isn't just for me, I said into the microphone. It's for everyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong, like they weren't good enough, or like their dreams were too big. It's for all of you who are still fighting, still dreaming, still working. Keep going. You never know where it will take you.
The night of the awards ceremony lingered in my mind long after it was over. As I stood there, holding the trophy, I realized that this wasn't just an award for my book. It was a symbol of everything I had fought for. It was a culmination of all the struggles, the doubts, the late nights, and the perseverance. But it wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who had been a part of my journey. When I returned home that night, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, reflecting on everything that had brought me here. My career, my family, my relationships, they had all changed, evolved into something deeper, more meaningful. I wasn't just the woman who had once been underestimated and mocked. I had become a woman who had earned her place, not through the validation of others, but through my own strength and resilience. The next morning, I called my parents. It had been a while since we had just talked, and I wanted to share the moment with them. As I told them about the award, I could hear the pride in their voices. They didn't have to say much. I could feel it in the way they spoke to me. It was different now. There was no more judgment, no more second-guessing. There was just love and respect. When I hung up the phone, I thought about how far we had all come. My sister had her own success now, and we were no longer competing or resenting each other. We had found common ground, something we could both be proud of. And my parents, who had once been distant, were now there for me in ways I never thought possible. It felt like everything had fallen into place. A few weeks later, I found myself standing at the front of a large conference room, preparing to speak at a business seminar. The room was filled with eager faces, many of them young entrepreneurs who had come to hear my story. I could feel the nervousness in my stomach, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was excitement. This was what I had worked for, to stand in front of a room full of people and share everything I had learned. I took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Carter, and I'm here to talk to you about something that's not often discussed in the world of business, the power of resilience. I'm not here to tell you how to get rich quick or how to build a successful company overnight. I'm here to tell you that it's okay to fail. It's okay to feel lost. And most importantly, it's okay to be you. I paused, letting the words sink in. Because the most important thing I've learned in this journey is that success isn't about perfection. It's about showing up every single day, even when it feels impossible. It's about doing the hard work, even when no one's watching. It's about trusting yourself, even when others doubt you. I looked around the room and I saw a sea of faces, some of them nodding, others taking notes, but all of them listening. For the first time, I realized that my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt like they weren't enough. It belonged to those who had been told they couldn't, those who had been knocked down and forced to rise again. And if I can do it, so can you. The journey isn't easy. It's messy, it's complicated, and there will be times when you want to quit. But don't. Keep going. Because the moment you give up is the moment you let someone else's doubts define you. There was a silence in the room, but it was the kind of silence that meant people were truly listening. They weren't just hearing the words. I could tell they were feeling them. When I finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. It wasn't for the words I had spoken, but for the person I had become. The woman who had learned to trust herself,
who had turned her pain into purpose, and who had found her voice. After the seminar, I stayed for a while talking with some of the attendees. They asked questions about my journey, my book, and my business, but there was one conversation that stuck with me. A young man came up to me, a nervous look in his eyes. "I've been thinking about starting my own business, but I've been so afraid of failing. After hearing your story, I don't feel as scared anymore." I smiled at him. "That's the first step. You're already on the right track." As I walked out of the building, I felt a sense of fulfillment that I couldn't quite explain. This was it. This was what I had been working toward. Not just success, but the ability to inspire others, to give them the courage to take their own leaps of faith. The following year, I published another book, a follow-up that expanded on the themes of resilience and personal growth. It was well received, and once again, people from all over the world reached out to thank me for sharing my story. But what really made me proud was not the success of the books or the awards or the recognition. What mattered most was that I had found peace within myself. I had become someone who no longer needed the approval of others to feel worthy. I had learned that my worth came from within, from the strength I had built, the lessons I had learned, and the lives I had touched along the way. As I sat in my office one evening, looking over the city that had witnessed my transformation, I smiled to myself. The journey had been long, but it had been worth every step. Because I wasn't just living for success anymore. I was living for something deeper, something that mattered more. I was living for me.